It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are looking at two topics, just two. And that is the newly revised Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act that was introduced today, and also talked about and introduced today was the MVP-PFL merger. So those are our primary topics. Obviously, we'll be starting off with our usual question, but we're going to take a look at, whether we think Nico Ali-Walsh got the wool pulled over his eyes, what kind of changes, be they meaningful or otherwise, were introduced in this new version. What comes next? We're going to weigh in on PFL and MVP and whether they can provide any kind of competition to the UFC and whether they can find some measure of success in the space. There's a lot to talk about. But before we start our yapping, we would recommend that you pick up a paid subscription because all of our episodes are split in half. You get to listen to the first half for free, but the second half is behind a paywall. So if you want to listen to that paywalled stuff, you need to pony up just $5. We're on the lower end. We don't charge a whole heck of a lot for our monthly subscription, and it gets you all the paywalled content. We would also ask that you please share our content around on social media because that also helps us. We appreciate you all very much. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing in whatever way you are subscribing. Now, John, how the heck are you?
Well, as you heard earlier, called me earlier, I'm dying, apparently. Dying over here. You're all alarmed about my health, but no, I'm actually pretty good. I just got a terrible cough, and I'll have it for a while. That's just the way it works with me. I get a cough, and I'll have it for a while. I'm getting beat up by my cat again for some reason. She is not happy with me. She got mad. I hid from her today, and she did not like that.
What do you mean you hid from her?
I just was playing a game. I thought the cat would enjoy it. I hid behind the bed, and man, she did not like that. She did not like me hiding from her. Did
she howl?
She started wincing and crying and biting me and pawing at me and whacking me. So that's a sure sign she did not like it.
You are a terrible dad.
I am God. I'm just getting beat up over here. This is a really abusive relationship between me and her.
So we had a lot of news today, and boy, I was kind of surprised with the MVP-PFL merger. I know there had been some rumblings about it, but I wasn't expecting it to be announced so soon. However, when it was announced that Senators Cruz and Senator Rosen had introduced this new version of the Revival Act, I was less surprised because, as we discussed on our last episode, you said that this could happen. And I feel like there was a catalyst to it, whether it was intentional or otherwise. I feel like the catalyst was the meeting with Nico Ali-Walsh and especially the photo op. I feel like that carried a lot of weight into this being kind of rushed in. Yeah. Do you feel that way a little?
I don't know if I feel like it was the catalyst. I feel instead it was almost like it was set up, like they knew they were going to introduce this bill. In fact, we said like a week ago or so, we'd heard that there's a new bill coming. And so we knew the bill was coming. I didn't know if it was going to be this week or beginning of next week. But it seems to me, if I had to just guess, is that they didn't rush it out because they had the meeting with Nico Ali-Walsh. I think they had plans to release this bill and that they set up that basically a photo op before they released it. That's the chain of events that I'm I'm believing happened. I don't, I wasn't in the room, but that's how it comes across to me. That was just a very well orchestrated PR move by Zuffa to get the opponent to the bill to meet with them as though they had come to a conclusion, come to some sort of agreement, and then lo and behold, this new version of it has been introduced.
Now, which one surprised you more, though? The Ali Act being dropped today, or the MVP-PFL merger? Like I said, we had both heard rumors, but which one surprised you more? Because that PFL merger kind of surprised me more.
No, neither one, because again, we both, word had been on the street this was going to happen, and there was nothing really new. Nothing new in the last few days, I should say. You hear rumors and stuff, and like the PFL MVP one kind of confirmed a lot of the rumors. And I guess the surprise to me of the Senate, we're going to talk about, I'm sure, later. I know we're going to. That's on your list of things to talk about. The new Ali Act bill is that as I thought there might be more changes, and that's the surprising thing to me is that this is really kind of the same old.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just felt like the MVP PFL news was going to take a little longer to drop. I guess the surprise for me was that it dropped this soon. We just started getting the rumblings of this within the past week. It's been about a week that those rumblings have been occurring. So I figure we had another 2 weeks before we got any word of it. I guess the surprise was how fast it dropped for me. So, all right. So let's go ahead and jump into the show proper, because we do have a lot of ground to cover. The question I'm getting ready to ask you. I have asked it to you every day for over a year. Are there any new filings or updates to the UFC antitrust cases?
Well, nothing interesting is the truth, but there is a couple filings that gives us something to talk about. So I will talk about them. The first is in the Davis v. Zuffa case. Now, Davis is the Phil Davis v. Zuffa. It's the one where Phil Davis is representing fighters outside the UFC, basically challenging their contracts. All there is a QC, a quality control update. Apparently they misfiled a document, so they have to refile it. Very exciting news to the listeners, I'm sure. Groundbreaking legalese here as we discuss that filing. And the other one is the case that we follow the least, is the Constantino v. Zuffa case had a filing. And the Constantino v. Zuffa is the one case that doesn't involve the fighters. That's the case that involves the fans suing the UFC for, again, I always laugh at this, for having a shitty product, apparently. That's the lawsuit's about. They want a class action over UFC providing crappy content. And so what they filed is a joint status report filed today, I believe it was. And it's related to the fighter antitrust suits, because they have overlapping defendants, which is in this case Zuffa, TKO Group, TKO Operating Company, and Endeavor. And they also share the discovery process. And so the content of the brief, there's two points they make in the brief. The first is a motions practice status. On July 21st, 2026, the defendants filed 3 motions, one to dismiss, one to dismiss the amended class action complaint, one to compel arbitration, and another one to stay discovery. And per the existing schedule, the plaintiff's opposition briefs are due to September 4th, 2026, with the defendant's replies to those opposition briefs due October 2nd, 2026. The other point that they made in this filing was on August 6th, I should say, there was a status hearing attendance. And so let me rephrase that. On August 6th, there will be a status hearing attendance. And so at a July 2nd, 2026 spoliation hearing, the court told the Constantino counsel, the attorneys for the fans, that they need not appear at the upcoming August 6th status conference, except where discovery matters warrant it. And so per that instruction, the Constantino plaintiffs will be represented by local counsel only. The out-of-town counsel doesn't plan to attend, absent further instructions. And Endeavor's counsel will attend regardless, since they're involved in multiple fighter cases. And so as you can tell, this is not the most groundbreaking news. Really, this is just procedural housekeeping. But since nothing else was filed, damn it, I was going to get something in there. And this is what we got.
Okay. All right. So let's get down to the meat and potatoes of the episode now. Senators Cruz and Rosen did introduce the latest version of the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act today. What is different about it from previous versions?
Well, there's a bunch of small differences. I mean, a lot of them are not that important. A lot of stuff like they have, on one, the House version. And really what I'm going to compare it to is the last version that passed the House, because that's the version it's eventually got to, they got to come together if they're going to pass it as a bill. And the House version that passed, they used shorthand all the time, UBO. This one does not. The Senate never calls it a UBO. They call it a Unified Boxing Organization every time. Just a minor thing. I don't know why they don't call it a UBO, but they decided not to. Interesting thing, they also about the compliance language. In the House, they say a UBO shall be deemed to be in compliance. Why this in the Senate, a UBO shall be considered to be in compliance. I have no idea what the difference is there. What that means legally, if one's deemed or considered, but that's the slight language. I almost think sometimes that someone goes through and makes slight changes, so it looks like they did something. But as we move down, you start seeing some more and more, larger changes. And then there is the penalty standard for the UBO officers, employees. In the House, it says they willfully and knowingly violate it. And for the penalty for willfully and knowingly violating, the UBO, the act here is it can be up to 1 year imprisonment or $20,000 fine. In the Senate, it drops the willfully and just says knowingly violates, which actually narrows it. It doesn't narrow it, but actually makes it easier to be accused of that, because you don't have two standards now. You have the one thing that you have to be brought one thing you have to be found for, and then they have a UBO definition, reliance on outside sanction organizations. In the House, and this is where we start getting to the stuff that I think is really important, because in the House it says, the House version of the bill, I should know, a UBO must implement its title ranking system, and then I'll quote from the House version here, without reliance on a sanctioning organization operating independently, right? So the House version, the UBO has to have its own titles and rankings, cannot use the rankings of a sanctioning organization. It's literally, in the House version, it is a parallel system. That's the way it's written, as a parallel system. In the Senate version, a UBO may rely upon, utilize, or recognize titles and rankings from an organization operating independently of it, right? And so it lets you, in this version, a UBO now can not only have their own titles and rankings internally, right? But they can also work with other titles and rankings as part of the UBO structure, which is very different than what they were saying before. So I think that's noteworthy, and we can go into detail on that later. Then there's another section. They have a new cap on the length of a contract. The Senate added, remember, Ilhan Omar added the 6-year cap on UBOs. On this version, on the Senate version, it changed it so that it's not just a 6-year cap on the total length of a contract. It's the first professional promotional agreement. In other words, when a boxer signs their very first agreement, the contract cannot be more than 3 years in length. So it has a much shorter contract length, but only for first-time professional boxers, first boxers signing their very first professional agreement. And reading it here too, this applies not just to UBOs, but all promoters as well, it looks like. And so that's a pretty big change from what we had in the House. And there's some positives there, but I also want to ridicule this later when we come back to it. And then there's an extension of protections to all promotional contracts. This is the Senate version only. The Senate added an application to all promotional contracts clause, extending certain protections. The communication window contract length caps to any boxer promotional contract, not just UBO contracts. The House limited this to only the UBO contracts only. So what this does is, if you remember, if we go back, the House had a 30-day pre-contract expiration communication window. So at the end of a contract, When you have 30 days left in your contract, you are allowed under the House version, if you're in a UBO, to communicate to other promoters, UBOs, whatever, to discuss going to them without violating the contract. In other words, the UBO cannot tell you cannot communicate with another promoter in the last 30 days of your contract. This, in the House version, it said you have 30 days, you can communicate with other people, you talk to them, see if they're interested in signing you. Now, the Senate version, they extend this to 90 days. So it's a longer version, and it applies again to, those inside the UBO and those outside. There's a consistent standards, a sense of Congress provision, which is in the House only. It's not in the Senate, so they took that out. So the House added a subsection directing the ABC, I should say, to publish a model legislative regulatory code, best practices recommendation, and an annual report card grading state commissions. That's not in the Senate bill at all. So we got rid of that kind of oversight of the ABC. There is a ratings information disclosure requirement, which was added to the Senate. This is kind of interesting, although it again raises questions about how it could actually work. The Senate has an FTC filing subsection that adds a specific requirement that a UBO which implements its own boxer rating system must annually submit its rating criteria, bylaws, appeal procedure, and list of voting officials to the FTC and ABC. Basically what sanctioning organizations have to do. The UBO now has to do as well, file with the FTC all those requirements. And then there's a kind of a pointless internet alternative to the FTC filing. I mean, I don't think anybody thinks that important. And it's also worth noting when this bill if it gets signed into law, instead of going into effect in 30 days, now it goes into effect 180 days. It's also worth noting that the Senate version does not have the portion about having only a singular title or only allowing for interim titles, that you can only have one championship per weight class. That whole section's gone. And so that's been removed as well. So there's been some changes to it, right? Been, some kind of dramatic, but the overall change I think is pretty clear is that the UBO is still there.
What is your opinion of this version of the bill?
Well, in some ways it's better, but would you be shocked to know that in some ways I think it's worse?
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's got some, the same thing. The main thing that really drives me nuts about it is it basically grants an exemption to the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, or, actually not even that. The exemption, if you're in compliance with the act, it's actually the Professional Boxing Safety Act, which the Ali Act, original Ali, amended. So all that doesn't really apply to UBOs, and that's still in place. And that seems to be the entire purpose of the bill. The purpose of the bill is we are going to grant boxers some additional safety nets, right? In exchange for not just not improving the Ali Act, we are going to get rid of all the Ali Act provisions. So, when the Boxing Insider had an article today I thought was somewhat interesting, worth checking out, which talked about the John McCain bill that he had introduced back in multiple times to amend the Ali Act to basically improve it. And then this version. The purpose of John McCain's bill was to introduce a mechanism to strengthen and enforce the Ali Act, because they knew the problem with the Ali Act, it wasn't being properly enforced. It needed something there, so they introduced a U.S. Boxing Commission that purpose was to enforce much of the Ali Act to make sure it actually had teeth. And so that was the intent there. So this bill doesn't do that. This bill gets rid of the idea that we're going to strengthen the Ali Act and enforce it. What this bill says, we're going to introduce new safety nets for fighters, $200 round minimum. UBOs are going to offer health insurance and drug testing and all these things that the UFC already does, which makes it very easy for Zuffa Boxing to get. We're going to offer all that as benefits to fighters. In exchange is we are going to get rid of the protections of the Ali Act. So it has, that's what it does. Basically, it says in exchange for some additional safety nets, we are asking you to get rid of the Ali Act protections. And a lot of those protections, as we've discussed many times, were designed to prevent someone from taking over the industry. So the parts of the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, I think, are super important. If you're following a UBO, those do not apply to you at all. Like the course of contract provision does not apply to you at all. That you're exempt from that. You're exempt from disclosure of finances. You're exempt from the sanctioning organization titles. Do not have to be when you do sanctioning organization. You don't have to follow the ABC criteria, which is that that they're open to all promoters. That they, regardless of promoter or manager, you have to be open to them. So all that stuff is removed, all those protections, and they introduced some of these new ones, and some of them I think are very sleight of hand, and I'll go over a couple. One that drives me nuts is there is the shorter contract, the basically a sunset provision. It says that contracts cannot be over 6 years, and for first time boxers, we're going to have a contract of just 3 years. And I'm sure they're patting themselves on the back for coming up with this because it looks so good. First time boxers, you sign your first contract. You're not trapped into an endless contract. Great. But as Kurt Emhoff commented, frustrated on my X account, that's the reverse. What promoters want to do is they sign young guys. They want long contracts because they have to build and develop that guy. And then if they're going to spend money on them, they want some way to recoup that when they hit it big. The people that you want to have short contracts are the guys that are already settled in the sport, that already have a position, that have a name and value, because those are the ones that can actually make the most off their name, right? So you almost want the reverse. You'd want a longer contract for a debuting fighter. And for an older veteran, well-known established fighter, you'd want a shorter contract maximum because, that fighter can then take advantage of the market more readily and earn more money. But they do the exact opposite, I think, obviously intentionally. And you can see, how that works because in the UFC antitrust case, that is something they cite. UFC boasts about that when they sold the UFC, is that the lower rated fighters are on very short contracts, but the higher you go up in the ratings, the closer you get to a champion, the longer the contract is, how much more they have locked down the fighter, because that's what you want to do is lock them down for more value. And, when they're more valuable, so they have less chance to renegotiate. And on top of that, now you introduce coercive contracts. You have these established fighters that you can perhaps lock down, especially with tolling provisions and all these other provisions, because, they're just easier to apply in-house. You can extend these fighters, and then you can use them to coerce fighters into the UBO. Although technically a UBO doesn't have to worry about coercive contracts because you have to sign in the UBO to get a fight. The whole UBO is coercive. You cannot get a fight with anybody in a UBO unless you sign with the UBO. And once you're signed with the UBO, if a promoter has two fighters, if you're already under contract with the promoter, the coercive contract provision doesn't apply. So there's that part, which I think is, I should say terrible, but it's slightly better than what we had before, but not better at all. And then they got rid of the one thing a lot of people really liked is they got rid of the single title per sanctioning organization, which they threw out for whatever reason as well. So the bill, I guess my thoughts, the bill is, it's in some ways it's slightly better. In other ways it's slightly worse, but overall it's the same bill. It's a bill designed to introduce a UBO system so that they can be exempt from competition, because that's the whole point. They want to have a self-contained walled garden type promotion, because that way there is less competition with their, over fighters, because they're not competing. They have the control of their own title, and they have the ability to use coercive contracts. And also, technically the boxers still have the private right of action, but if a UBO is in compliance, what do you have the private right of action for? Because there's no violation of the Ali Act then. So it's just a way to make them immune from the mechanisms they have that were introduced that were supposed to create more competition, but because they don't want competition, they want a system, a bill that will allow them not to compete for fighters. And this is what they get with this one.
Let's go back for a second. I need to rewind. I want you to tell me something about them doing away with that provision that says they can only have one title. Does that mean that they can introduce a BMF title?
Yes.
Oh my God.
The thing is about this, The thing is about this title thing is the argument was, the whole thing they introduced was, oh, boxing is fractured. And we want to introduce a system that's a streamlined system where we have one title, promoter controls the rankings, all that stuff. Well, the reverse is here now because, and also on top of that, the other House version, besides the UBO, was supposed to simplify it by having just a unified title, one title. The House version had that provision, the boxing industry standards in Section 4. It had a section called simplification of titles, where Section 1 was singular titles. A sanctioning organization or a unified boxing organization shall award only one championship title for each weight class, and except for the exception of an interim title on specific conditions. So that would have greatly reduced the number of sanctioning organization titles because, as we all know, they have the regular champion, the super champion, the silver title, all these titles. It would have made them one title per sanctioning organization, and the UBO would only have one title per weight class as well. And so it would simplify it. And the idea was the UBO would not compete with sanctioning titles. So the UBO, again, the people that were cheerleading this was the idea that the UFC, not the UFC again, I misspeak, TKO using the UFC model with Zuffa Boxing would somehow take over boxing and make their title the only one that matters. And we would get this undisputed singular title. That was kind of the dream scenario. But under this version of the bill, is not only do all the sanctioning organizations allowed to print up as many fucking titles as they want, so that doesn't change anything. The UBO is allowed to make multiple titles. They can make, the regular champion, the BMF title, the intercontinental champion, whatever they want. They can introduce as many titles as they want. And also, it's not restricted to just the UBO. The UBO can also compete for other titles and for other sanctioning organizations. So really, we just, instead of simplifying, which they keep arguing it's doing, you're just adding more titles on top of the titles exist. And so you're adding titles that they're allowed to use that no one else can use because it's the UBO's own title, but they're allowed to operate in the sanctioning system. And also they're allowed to be exempt from the Ali Act provisions because they have their own title. I'm a little confused at the logic of this.
Oh man, I can just imagine all the crazy titles that they're gonna come up with. Did the things that Nico Ali-Walsh spoke about wanting to change, all those things that he wanted to happen, did any of those show up in this new version?
Well, we'll go off the 4 that he brought up to Helwani. He brought up more, him and his manager brought up more on the Sean Siddell show, but with Helwani, it was only 4, I think he mentioned. And those 4 was, one is he wanted greater disclosure, right? He wanted free agency, a little unspecified. He wanted, I'm trying to remember the other 2 ones that he had. Free agency, contracts, non-coercive contracts or contract restrictions, limit on contract lengths, I think it was, and rankings. So now, did he get them all in this? Well, first I should note, I'm not certain that this bill represents the input of Nico Ali-Walsh. It might, but I'm not sure it does. So it is possible that when he talked to, he said he talked to senators and stuff, that this version of the bill does not include any of his input. But it's also possible that this is the end result. They kind of ignored their suggestions and went with this, because what it does is the disclosure rulings, yes, but the disclosure is only limited to the state requirements. It's not limited. The disclosure rules that is in this bill requires you to disclose what's required by the state athletic commission in the state you're fighting in. It doesn't mean you have to disclose what's required by the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, which is the compensation the promoters make. In other words, the revenue. That part's exempt because, again, the UBO is exempt from the act, and so the UBO doesn't have to share that part. They just have to share the disclosure that's required under the State Athletic Commission, which is much narrower. It doesn't include those finances and compensation for the most part. So disclosure, it doesn't seem to have that. At least not the way everybody talked about disclosure. And personally, I don't think disclosure is the most important part. People go nuts about that. But disclosure is a little bit, misleading, I guess, or, it's kind of something that people get worked up over, but it's less important because if you look at how the industry works now, like let's take UFC, for example, or Zuffa Boxing, they have an annual fee they're getting from Paramount, right, for UFC. Who determines how much each event gets paid by Paramount? Right. It's a contract. So they could design that contract so that they determine how much each event gets as a payment from Paramount. So if you're disclosing what you're getting from Paramount, let's say, just using a wild number here, $1 billion this year from Paramount, and that we have 43 events, so that means on average about $25 million per event should go to the UFC. But the UFC decides the way they want to structure it is that the fight nights will get $5 million per fight night, and then there will be $15 million for the pay-per-views, right? Well, you put that together and you're only 1/3, 40% of the way through the total $1 billion. And so UFC then says, and a monthly installment to pay us for the brand awareness or something like that. Well, okay, that's a possible way they could structure that contract. But as a fighter, you're asking for disclosure and you see what they're making per pay-per-view and you see that's like $15 million per pay-per-view in this situation. Does that really represent the value of the pay-per-views? Is that really what Paramount is paying that $1 billion for? Is only a small percentage of that going per pay-per-view? Or has it been structured in a way to hide how much is actually going to the pay-per-view? How much is being paid for those events? And so that's my concern about the people obsession with the disclosure, is that it can be played with a lot to mask how much is being paid. So I don't think that's the primary thing people should be concerned about, unless there was a lot of mechanisms to strengthen it. I mean, you should have disclosures, good, but that's not the number one thing I think they're concerned about. Zuffa Boxing and UFC and TKO, they're not terrified of disclosure because they have the means to mask what an event is being made. The other ones, though, so disclosure, either way, disclosure was not successfully included in this. The contract lengths, well, there is a limit to the contracts, 6 years or 3 years, but that is terrible compared to the 12-month agreement that we had under the course of contract provision, where if you engage in a course of contract, basically you require someone to sign with you in order to fight your fighter, your boxer under contract. The maximum length of contract could be under the Ali Act was 12 months. If it's a mandatory declared by a sanctioned organization, there can be no extensions. It can just be the one fight. So there's no options. It's a one-time fight. You cannot demand that they sign with you ahead of time for that. Both those are better than 3 months or 3 years or 6 years. And also it doesn't match what previous investigations into boxing determined. If you look back at all the hearings that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, they kind of settled on that, at the very max, a contract for boxing should be 5 years, but really the best thing would be that boxing contract should be set about 3 years. And here we have a 3-year contract just for first-time contracts, which again flips the script and what works best. And then they have a 6-year contract as the one for everybody else. And 6 years is the freaking entire career for almost every fighter. And so that's well past the length which would be, acceptable. So contract length, they didn't seem to listen to them at all. They got rid of the course of contract provision. They're still exempt from it. So that didn't work at all. They do have the requirement that the UBO has to submit all the same criteria, the guidelines, criteria, bylaws, and everything with the FTC, which is interesting because, that's basically they have to comply with the Ali Act for that section, except for the fact is what happens if they violate it? There's no, if they can submit everything, they can submit the criteria, but it doesn't say they have to actually follow that criteria. There's no, unlike the Ali Act, which says you're supposed to follow the criteria as written by the ABC, here it says you just have to submit it, but then there's nothing saying you have to actually comply with it. So that's toothless as well. So to answer your question, it doesn't look like any of those big four were included. And the other items that I heard them talking about on Sean Siddell that they wanted to introduce, none of, like a minimum payment for fighters that are required to wear a uniform, things like that, none of them have been included as well. So
what about the rankings?
Well, that's the one I meant. I just meant the
right. You had mentioned earlier that they made this carve out that they could use the outside rankings now. So that's kind of like having their cake and eating it too, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, they could use outside rankings. I mean, it raises questions. What's the point of a UBO?
Yeah.
The UBO seems to be a structure designed specifically to let you be exempt from the protections of the Ali Act. That's it. You can do anything else, but just can't enforce the Ali Act against the UBO.
That's crazy. All right. Now, what happens? Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that without Nico realizing it, they sort of swindled him into that photo op? And that's, I won't say that's why it's being rushed to the table, but that photo op definitely helps them with this thing being introduced now.
No, I think you're right. I think, we talked about last week. One of my concerns was, I'm not, a lot of people running with the conspiracies that Nico sold everybody out and he has a contract coming with the Zuffa Boxing. I mean, maybe he will end up with a contract with Zuffa Boxing, but I don't think that's the, Occam's razor does not tell me that, he's sold out. I don't get that sense. I mean, talking to a lot of people, he seems very adamant about his, he wanted to help fighters. I think it seems more likely to me now that the other concern I had the other day was that he's kind of naively played by Zuffa Boxing, mm-hmm. right? That they had set up, as we talk about this, I pointed out before, there's a limited amount of time to pass this bill, right? It seems very unlikely. In fact, talking to people in DC, in the Senate, and the staff members of the Senate and the House, they thought it very unlikely it gets passed because there's just not a lot of time. And so, how can you get it passed? Well, there's a couple ways, but what would help is if it looked like there's no opposition. And so lo and behold, Nico Ali-Walsh, the most visible opposition, probably the most elegant speaker of the opposition, because the other major figure of the opposition is Oscar de la Hoya, who I don't think is the best speaker. And the other ones are the sanctioning organizations that no one wants to hear from at all. So Nico Ali-Walsh, the most visible opposition, and also someone with the name Ali, which is super important here. He's been outspoken against it. Lo and behold, they have a meeting with him and Nick Khan where they're going to discuss what they can do to fix the bill to make him happy, have a photo op, have a story that basically he's, discussing with them and getting some changes done. Then a few days later, a new bill is introduced. Now, I do not know if his changes were incorporated yet. Do they have any input? But it sure sounds like, just from the visuals, the optics, that looks like, Nico Ali-Walsh gave his input and they took it and they introduced this better version of the bill, as Ted Cruz calls it, that it probably incorporated the complaints from others. So this is a bill that everybody's agreed on. At least that's the image they're trying to project. And so when we move forward, there's really no opposition. So let's just give this the green light and have everybody vote for it and we can move on. I think that's the sense I'm getting, is that he was, manipulated in a way that brought to this event, got a photo op, made a big deal that making it look like he's kind of like they've come to discussions about what they can do to agree on to improve the bill. And then they introduced this version that maybe incorporates some of his ideas, maybe doesn't, but overall it includes the number one thing they want to have on this bill, and that's the UBO. And it looks like now, Nico Ali-Walsh is now signed off on the bill.
And it did not help that he was so optimistic on social media about that meeting. It felt to me like they fed him a line of bullshit just to get the photo op and the optimism from him.
That too is very possible. And I mean, again, I think he's getting some unfair criticism because he might be just generally honest. Like I had discussions, I talked to senators, but you're dealing with people that their whole job is to set up, not just Nick Khan being smart. No, they have a whole staff of people there whose job is like, how can we improve the optics? How can we make this look good? How can we tilt the balance in our favor? I doubt that Nico Ali-Walsh has a staff doing that for him.
Yeah.
And there's also very few people involved. We have huge numbers of people working on behalf of TKO for this. Millions of dollars being spent on lobbyists, an army of lobbyists, as Luke Thomas said when he was there in Washington, both the Senate and the House, witnessing him work. Just a massive detail assigned to this. On the other side is some opposition, hodgepodge opposition, limited in number because the vast majority of people in the boxing industry are not fighting this. They're even the ones that oppose it. They can't take the time to oppose it. And those opposing it all have kind of, conflicting demands. I'm sure those that, that are looking out for the fighters more than anybody else have alternative issues than those from the sanctioning organizations that are also fighting it for reasons that perhaps the other members would think that should apply to the sanctioning organization. So it's not a unified front. Where on the other side, it's one entity, TKO. Everybody's paid. Everybody's on the same, on the same road, working together in the same direction. On the other side, you have a lot of conflict. It's just a hodgepodge group of people doing it in their free time for the most part.
We will keep everyone up to date on that part. Now, what is going to happen next?
Well, that's the question. Next, I guess the next thing is next week is the Senate goes on their August recess. So nothing. That's what kind of was important that they introduced this bill, because it gives it a window to get passed. If it didn't get introduced now, it seems very unlikely there'd be enough time for it to pass. But they go on an August recess. So they do not come back. The Senate does not come back till September 11th. Now, I really doubt when they get back, they're going to tackle this bill, because there is the government budget. They have to pass a budget. They have to prevent a shutdown. There's going to be a lot of important bills waiting for them when they get back. Those priority bills are going to, obviously take the priority, as I just said. And so for the next 3 to 4 weeks after that, when they get back into D.C., I don't think this bill gets touched, except for maybe some PR rounds, some communications are put out, or on Ted Cruz's site, there's some posting about it. Then they all go on break for the election. There's like a 5-week break in election years where people that have campaigns go back home to run their elections, to campaign, and they don't come back till after, for early November. So they get back in early November, and then they're back for about 3 weeks before the Thanksgiving break. And then there's another couple weeks before the Christmas break. And then basically that's the end of the year, because they swear in a new Congress at the beginning of next year. So you're talking maybe 5 weeks total to get this done. So they've introduced the bill now. The next step is the committee's going to have a markup meeting and then a vote on it, all probably in one day. That will probably be scheduled after the election. They can get that done. Then the question is, can they reconcile the two bills? Now, one way I've been told that they possibly could get around that is, instead of sending it back to the House and sending it back to the Senate, and both, having actually they wouldn't send it to the House and Senate. They'd have a committee for both get together and draft a new version, and then it'd be sent to the House for a vote and sent to the Senate for a vote, approved, and then go to Donald Trump. That's a lot of steps. And there's just not enough time. The other process that possibly could happen, I've been told that's a possible, doable method by them, is that instead after they finish the markup, what they do is they introduce, let's say, a must-pass bill, an important big bill that they want to pass, not a reconciliation bill, because reconciliation bills have rules about what can be put into them, but some large end-of-the-year bill. They go back to the House and they have them write up a new version that matches what the Senate has. They insert that at the end of the bill, perhaps something like the college sports bill that everybody's discussing, put that in that, and then on the Senate side, they do the same thing. Both chambers vote for it, pass it. It's now law. Donald Trump can sign it and be done with. And so that's a road, a path that they could possibly do. And what makes it kind of conceivable is that
to access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!